except for anonymous ones. Someone else?
The question is, Honourable Clayton Cosgrove.
Mr Chairman, I just want to take a brief call. I am surprised that the Minister and the Chair, after that erudite dissertation from David Parker, who is, after all, a member of the legal profession, I'm surprised the Minister didn't choose to address the questions which he put to him in respect of fees. And could I take the opportunity perhaps to get an indication, given that this is a serious bill from the Minister, as to whether he will, before presumably a closure is upon us, actually answer those questions?
In the next part.
In the next, the Minister says in the next part. Well, I think it might be appropriate, Minister, through you, Mr Chair, that these questions are addressed in their relevant part, because it then aids, obviously, to the debate. If the questions are answered in an appropriate way, we can move on. If they're not, then we may have further questions, because this bill also does support other legislation in terms of preserving the integrity and credibility of business in both domestically and internationally. We know, of course, as we address Part 2 in respect of fees, that this bill was originally introduced, and then the baton was passed, but originally introduced by the then Labor Cabinet Minister and Commerce Minister Leanne Dalzell, to be followed by Simon Power, in a somewhat unfinished business that this Minister has taken on. It would be fair to say that there is, like with most of these bills, bipartisan support in respect of them, and I note the Chair of the Committee's nodding, and it was dealt with pretty in a good-natured way. But I say this, that I think the Minister should address those technical questions. I would hope that he's not going to sort of wait till the end, till speakers have had their go and then sort of rattle through a whole lot of answers without giving speakers the opportunity, or subsequent speakers, to then perhaps pick away in a positive way, but to ask substantially other technical questions in respect of this, because we know that Part 2 sets out the fees framework for this regime, and there are some issues, as Mr Parker outlined, in terms of business-to-business arrangements, which I think the Minister should give some or allude to at the very least, and give us some assurances, because this is about, of course, aligning us with Australia, who passed similar legislation in 2007, which of course does raise the question which I put to the Minister some nights ago about other legislation, which, Mr Chair, obviously if I went down that track you'd call me to order, as to why a series of commerce bills critical to the credibility of and integrity of our business community have sat around. We know Simon Power had a pretty good ability to punch legislation through, and he did quite prolifically actually in many of his portfolios, but it's sort of ground to a halt with this Minister. And again, as I said to him last week, I think in respect of other legislation, I'd be grateful for an indication from the Minister as to where he believes the priorities lie in respect of this sort of legislation. Australia's had it since 2007. We kicked the ball off on exit from government. His predecessor then did, I think, a pretty admirable job of trying to progress it amongst all the other sort of legislative priorities that were there, both in commerce and in his, I think he was Justice Minister and Leader of the House at the time, and then we come to this Minister. So I'd be grateful to know where he sees, in a general sense, the commerce legislation lying in respect of the priorities of the government framework, and as a sort of a show of good faith to that point, I think he should address immediately, not in a subsequent sort of debate or down the track, the issues that David Parker raised. They are quite critical. They are of a technical nature, and I don't know if the Minister is a lawyer. I certainly know I'm not. and I'm reliant on the eminence of the arguments put forward by Mr Parker and others, but I'm sure given the high level of expertise that's at the Minister's disposal, I pay tribute to the officials as we went through this. I'm sure my opposite number would as well as we went through the Select Committee process. I'm sure the Minister has the ability to turn around, turn to his right, lean back and ask for further information.
Mr Chair.
Honourable Craig Foss.
Fantastic.
No, very briefly, Mr Chair, and I do acknowledge the previous speaker